Hello and welcome to WashingtonExec's video series. I'm your host, Amanda Ziadeh, and with me today is Chuck Prow. He's the president and CEO of Vectrus. Thank you so much for joining me today, Chuck.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So we're here today to discuss how Vectrus and its employees have met the various rising challenges of the pandemic. And considering Vectrus operates critical infrastructure for the U.S. military around the globe, how have you worked with your clients to keep the missions you support ready and operating through the current coronavirus pandemic?
Well, that's a great question. And just as a bit of background for your audience today, is Vectrus is a provider of base operations. We operate military supply chains and military IT networks, and we do that around the globe. 80% of our business is outside of the United States, and so maintaining readiness, not only for ourselves, but more importantly for the missions we operate, have been of paramount focus for us over the duration of the pandemic. We had a very early glimpse into the pandemic because of the work that we do in South Korea. And many of you may remember that South Korea was one of the earlier countries that were affected by COVID. So from that point forward, we created a kind of a global operating picture, if you will, of all the sites we operate, the various host nations requirements for COVID, and then obviously our military requirements as well. It's been very complex to say the least. Of note, however, I will like to thank all 13,000 of our employees globally who have been able to keep our bases for our military clients operating at a high degree of readiness. There were obviously some interesting times throughout the last 9 months, but I would especially like to focus on a couple of the areas that we were able to provide mission support to, areas that you and your audience may recognize. We were actually aboard both Comfort and Mercy as they were deployed to San Diego and to New York. We are very proud, obviously, to be a part of that operation. In addition to that, it's also important to recognize that military operations continue with or without a pandemic. So the role that we played in both deploying military resources, receiving those resources, and operating the bases were areas that we at Vectrus were, very pleased and proud to be a part of. And we can't really thank enough how flexible our military clients have been, our acquisition clients have been, in allowing us to adjust our operations to meet the realities of the pandemic.
Wonderful. And furthermore, how are you and the employees of Vectrus managing through the pandemic, and what resources have been available to employees during this time?
Well, obviously, the CARES Act and the other legislation that were so quickly provided by the government were absolutely essential. But that aside, it has really been the flexibility of our military clients in allowing us to adjust operations, adjust workloads in a way that we can keep not only our military clients safe, but our own people safe. So we've gone to a variety of flexible crewing approaches in the operations that we support globally. We've been able to provide very different approaches to maintaining network IT assurance, because as you and many of your clients know, that some of those basic operations were affected during the pandemic as well. We have a global operations center that meets daily, and as it's probably obvious, but it was really obvious for us that many of the host nations requirements changed on us in many cases daily, if not several times a day. So utilizing advanced technologies to allow us to maintain constant communication with our teams across the globe, as well as our clients, were absolutely paramount in allowing us to operate with the degree of flexibility and mission assurance that we've been able to over the past several months.
And the base operations market continues to evolve and become more reliant on advanced technology. How has the market changed since you came to Vectrus, and how do you see it evolving?
Well, it was very clear to me upon my arrival to Vectrus in 2016 that the historical ways of maintaining both bases and supply chain were in a state of transformation. And frankly, this transformation is one of the things that helped us manage through the pandemic so well. Many of us know that infrastructures globally are converging with information technology. Information technology is essential now to allowing us to operate our bases globally. I'll give you a great example. One, example's worth a lot of words. When I arrived at Vectrus, one of my first trips was to the Middle East, to Kuwait, at the bases we operate in Kuwait. And it took me, a week or so to move around the country and understand our operations and the workflows of those operations within Kuwait. It was a very logical thing to do. Today, if I were to take that same trip, I would first go to an operations center where I would look at all 5,000 active work orders across the country of Kuwait on any one day at any one time and be able to see the status of those work orders. That would be an example of how we're continuing to, I like to use the word, infuse technology into our base supply chain and network operations in such a way that makes those infrastructures more resilient and more able to adapt to changes, quite frankly, like the pandemic brought upon us.
All right. Well, thank you and Vectrus so much for all the important critical work you are continuing to do at this time. And thank you for joining me today.
And thank you to you and WashingtonExec for helping keep us connected during these crazy times. We appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye.